welcome to Kids Church. Hope you've had a lovely week. How'd you get with your pancakes? Did you manage more than the 4 flips that I managed last week? If so, well done. We're starting a new series today on what it means to live in God's kingdom. What it means to follow... Woof, Jesus. I think I'm going to have to come down, actually. But let's start with a little game.
All right, it's game time. Here's what you need to do. You need 3 props. You need a hat. You need some kind of pencil, maybe a straw, so you can put in your mouth. And you need a chair. And I'm going to tell you what to do, but you need to do the opposite of whatever I tell you. So if I tell you to take your hat off, put it on. If I tell you to stand up, sit down. All right? Are you with me? Oh, if I tell you to put your pen in your mouth, take it out. And so on. Okay? It's quite simple. Go get your props and let's begin. Stand up. Sit down. Sit down. Put your hat on. Take your hat off. Take your hat off. Put your hat on. Put your pen in your mouth. Sit down. Stand up. Put your pen in your mouth. Take your pen out your mouth. Put your hat on. Take your hat off. Sit down. Stand up. Sit down. Stand up. Put your hat on. Take your hat off. Take your hat off. Put your pen in your mouth. Put your hat on. Take your pen out your mouth. Sit down. Stand up. Sit down. Sit down. Stand up. Sit down. Put your hat on. Take your hat off. Put your hat on. Take your hat off. Put your pen in your mouth. Take your pen out your mouth. Put your pen in your mouth. Take your pen out your mouth. Put your hat on. Take your hat off. Put your hat on. Sit down. Stand up. Stand up. Put your hat on and put your pen in your mouth. Right. Are you sitting down without your hat and without your pen? That's right. I'm pretty sure that's right. You could just keep playing that if you want. That's the game of opposites. Why are we playing opposites, Claire? And why were you standing on your head? What has that got to do with kingdom living? Well, you may well ask, and I'm not going to tell you just yet, because I'm going to read you a story. And no, it's not from the Bible. What? It's from The Next Best Thing. No, I'm kidding. It's from The Magic Flowery Tree, which is a nice book. It's a good book. And if you don't know these books, basic premise that you need to know is that these children can climb a tree, which is magical, and at the top of the tree they can go into lots of different magical lands. But the magical lands move, so when they climb the tree they don't necessarily know where they're going to end up. In today's chapter they end up in the land of Topsy-Turvy. Joe climbed the ladder and suddenly his head poked out into the land of Topsy-Turvy. Then, one by one, all the others followed, and soon all 7 of them stood in the curious land. Rick was not as used to strange lands as the others were. He stood and stared with his eyes so wide open that it really seemed as if they were going to drop out of his head. And indeed, it was a strange sight that he saw. Every house was upside down and stood on its chimneys. The trees were upside down, their heads buried in the ground and their roots in the air. And the people walked upside down too. They're walking on their hands, with their legs in the air, said Joe. Goodness, what a peculiar thing to do. Everyone stared at the folk of Topsy-Turvy Land. They got along very quickly on their hands and often stopped to talk to one another, chattering busily. Some of them had been shopping and carried their baskets on one foot. The chapter goes on and it's a very fun chapter. Indeed, I do believe that Joe ends up upside down and has to be transformed, inverted, if you will, later on in the chapter. So if you enjoyed that, Enid Blyton, good fun. That's not the main point, though, of today. We are thinking today about what Jesus says it's like to live in the kingdom, what it's like to follow him, for him to be our king. Now, in the book of Matthew, we're told that Jesus goes up a mountain with his disciples and he teaches them. And we've come to know these teachings as the Sermon on the Mount, and that's what we're going to be looking at. So Jesus has gone up the mountain with his disciples and he's teaching them about what it means to follow him. And the very first thing he says is very strange. He says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Now, you might think that sounds a little bit upside down. That sounds a little bit topsy-turvy, because normally we think, blessed are the poor? No, blessed are the rich. Blessed are the people with loads of stuff, or blessed are the people who are really talented or beautiful or popular or clever. Those are the blessed people. Those are the fortunate people or the happy people or the lucky people, the successful ones. Jesus says, no, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now I'm going to tell you another story, and this one is from the Bible, and this might help us to understand a little bit more what that looks like.
If you want to follow along, this reading is from Matthew 8 verses 1 to 4. When Jesus came down from the hill, large crowds followed him. Then a man suffering from a dreaded skin disease came to him, knelt down before him and said, "Sir, if you want to, you can make me clean." Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him. "I do want to," he answered. "Be clean." At once the man was healed of his disease. Then Jesus said to him, "Listen, don't tell anyone, but go straight to the priest and let him examine you. Then, in order to prove to everyone that you are cured, offer the sacrifice that Moses ordered."
So did you spot in that story who it was that came to see Jesus? And more importantly, what was wrong with him? In that version, we're told that he has a skin disease. Now, we know that that was a skin disease called leprosy. Other versions use that word. And if you had leprosy and you were living in first century Palestine, you had a very serious problem, because not only did you have a really nasty skin disease, you also would have been cut off from society because it was so contagious that you had to go and live far away from other people. And you would probably not be able to work for your living because you couldn't come into contact with anybody. So you would essentially be outcast from society. So this man really has nothing. He's really poor in spirit. Now, why do you think he comes to Jesus? And finally, where else could he have gone? Is there anything else that he could have done, or anywhere else he could have gone? So those questions, just to get you thinking about how that story matches up with what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The man in our story today is a good example of somebody that knew he was poor in spirit. He comes to Jesus and he falls on his knees, and he knows that he's got nothing to offer Jesus. He's got nothing to bring to him. His suitcase is empty. His hands are empty. He is a man who knows that he is completely dependent on God, on this Jesus in front of him. And so he asks for his help. And Jesus says, "Yes, I will help you." And that man is blessed. He's blessed. Not just because he's healed, but because he knows who Jesus is. He recognises Jesus for who he is. He knows where to go for help, and he knows what to do. He falls on his knees and he asks for it. Okay, quick inversion challenge. Can you see the world upside down? Go. Now, what do I mean? What are you doing right now? Maybe you're attempting a headstand. Maybe you're really good at handstands or cartwheels. Maybe you can walk on your hands. Maybe you can do that thing where you get into a bridge pose. so that your head is looking the other way? Can you do any of those things? Please do this safely. But try and see if you can see the world upside down. What you can do, if you don't do anything, is you can lie on your bed or a sofa and just put your head back and see the world upside down. Why would you do that? Well, number one, it's quite good for you to get upside down, apparently. Number two, it's quite good to see the world from a different perspective. Do you know that great song by Mumford and Sons? If you don't, maybe you could have a listen to it after this, called The Cave. I think it's called The Cave or Cave, I don't know. Where he says, so come out of your cave, standing on your hands, or maybe walking on your hands, see the world hanging upside down. Because you can be dependent when you know the Maker's heart. You can be completely dependent on God when you know and you trust in what God is like. All this chat about being upside down is a bit weird, isn't it? But sometimes when we read what Jesus says, it's a bit like he's turned the world upside down. And sometimes it's good to see the world upside down from his perspective and to think, actually, I think this makes more sense. And it reminds us to be completely dependent on God. Those funny words from Mumford and Sons come from this idea of the world being turned upside down so that we realise that we are just hanging from a thread, almost as it were, totally dependent on God, our Maker. Now, that man in the story knew he was completely dependent on Jesus. He had nowhere else to go. There was nothing he could do. So he went on his knees to Jesus. Now, as you stand upside down or look upside down or whatever you're doing to get inverted today, have a think about that. How would it be if I saw the world upside down a bit like Jesus sees it? Right, let's get a little bit crafty just to help us to think a little bit more about this idea of being empty, coming with nothing. So I've got myself some clay. Now, ooh, dropped it on the floor. You don't need to use clay. You could use salt dough, or you could use Play-Doh, something, you know, that you can mould. And I'm going to mould it into an empty pot. All right. Now, when I'm going to do that, I've made it into a ball. I'm just actually going to get something to push into it. It's like a push pot. So you could use, you know, your what is that? Knuckle? Or your thumb, or whatever. Or if you have a little tea light, you can push the tea light in around your pot, right, like this. And then hand shape it around the tea light. Just provides quite a good kind of structure. Okay. And then we have rather a nice tea light holder. So you take your tea light out for a minute. You've got two things, right? You've got your, you see this? Your clay pot, which is empty. We come to God. I've not done this very nicely. You could make yours much more attractive. We come to God knowing that we bring nothing with us. On our knees, poor in spirit. But Jesus says that the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. That's because we see the king in his rightful place. So if you had a tea light, you could even pop your tea light in to your clay mould to put Jesus in his rightful place. Now, this is, I've used clay, so mine's going to air dry. So before I let that happen, I might even just write around that. I could take my verse and I could write it around, or I could decorate it, I can do whatever I like with that. But it's just a nice little reminder that we come with nothing, but God gives us everything.